The enduring influence of French colonial Catholicism in Charleston, South Carolina. Although Roman Catholics were denied religious freedom in the British colonies, the American Revolution secured religious liberty for all through the ratification of the United States Constitution in 1789. In that same year, the French Revolution sent waves of refugees to the new American Republic. Revolution spread to France's colonies, and by 1791, refugees from Saint-Domingue and other French Caribbean colonies landed in American ports from Boston to New Orleans. Many of these Caribbean emigres were Catholic, and many were free or enslaved blacks. For example, whatever the blacks' condition of freedom, most found themselves able to practice their religion in the new republic. For example, Mary Elizabeth Lang, a free woman of color who fled to Baltimore, Maryland, founded the Oblate Sisters of Providence in 1828. Pierre Toussaint, born enslaved in St. Marc, Saint-Domingue, worked and practiced his religion in New York. Only when his owner died in 1807 did he become a free man. The Roman Catholic congregation in Charleston, later named St. Mary's, was an outpost on the frontiers of European wars of revolution. French Catholic refugees from France and its Caribbean colonies outnumbered the Irish, German, Italian, and all other Catholics in the city. Irish, many of whom had been refugees from British oppression, had dominated the church in its first years. Their insistence on having English-speaking, often Irish priests led the French-speaking refugees to petition the Archbishop of Baltimore, John Carroll, to secure a priest who could speak their own language. The Caribbean refugees were familiar with the European missionary religious orders that had maintained the old regime doctrine and discipline. The language divide, as well as differences between Irish and French liturgical practices, caused such havoc among Charleston's Catholics that Rome created a new diocese of the new diocese of Charleston in 1820. The Diocese of Charleston was the size of France and had a free and enslaved population greater than the Diocese of Richmond, Virginia, created in the same year. Gallic culture influenced many aspects of life in Charleston. As late as 1840, Charleston artist Charles Fraser noted one could hear French spoken in the streets. Ecclesiastical politics also favored French Catholics. For example, in 1806, nine of the nine vestrymen of St. Mary's were Irish. By 1822, 6 of the 9 vestrymen were French, and the church was informally known as the French Church. And 11 of the 15 pew holders at St. Mary's were prominent French Charlestonians. The Mrs. Avalaya and Lacoste paid $40 per year to rent their pew. Mr. Passeleg paid $30, and Mrs. Marché de Genlis paid $10. Balcony rates were discounted to accommodate blacks. Irish-born Bishop John England quickly established a cathedral, the Second Catholic Church in Charleston. Sacramental registers of these first 2 churches illuminated the scope of French Catholic population and its influence within the diocese. Free people of color appeared in the baptismal registers not only as the newly baptized Catholics, but as sponsors and parents as well, while white Catholics also appeared as sponsors for the free and enslaved people. Generations of the Catholic Barbeau family maintained close ties with their formerly enslaved fellow Catholics throughout the 19th century. Non-Catholics, Methodists, Baptists, Episcopalians, and Jews, among others, permitted their Catholic enslaved people to freely practice their religion. To Protestant, English-speaking South Carolinians accustomed to strict demarcation between black and white society, French mixed-race Catholics were an exotic threat to stability. Some Catholic slave owners in Charleston owned plantations in the surrounding districts. For example, John Schmidt Sr., moved at least one of his Catholic slaves to his plantation in Green Pond, South Carolina. In the latter half of the 19th century, the Black Catholic enclave of Catholic Hill near Green Pond emerged from the slavery era and became a Black Catholic presence in the faith. Pope Gregory XVI sought to reform the Catholic Church after the upheavals of the Revolutionary era. He secured concordats with the newly ceded Latin American and Caribbean nations, including the Haitian Republic, the former French colony of Saint-Domingue. Haitian clergy, formerly obedient to Rome, were now employees of the state in the post-revolutionary church. Because of his familiarity with black and white French Catholics in Charleston, Pope Gregory sent John England in the 1830s to the island to bring the Haitian church back to Rome. Intersectional politics and the slavery crisis in the United States thwarted England's mission. Providing ministry to Catholics in rural areas was a persistent problem in Charleston and in all states because the few overworked priests traveled great distances. Transportation was expensive, and diocesan funds were meager. In the antebellum era, local seminarians finished their studies in Rome at the Urban College of the Propaganda Fide. Once they were ordained and back home in their diocese, their responsibilities included writing biennial progress reports to the Propaganda. These reports illuminated the challenges and recorded successes and failures. Father Felix Carr taught catechism, assisted at the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Charleston, and ministered to 100 Catholics on Sullivan's Island, a 30-minute boat trip away. Father Carr also had black and white rural Catholics to visit. All antebellum Charleston Catholic parishes were customarily integrated, as were all the city's Protestant churches. In fact, most urban churches, whatever their faith, had black congregants. In the aftermath of the South's defeat in the American Civil War, racial segregation sought to perpetuate the white supremacy in ways that further divided all faith communities. Bishop Patrick Lynch established St. Peter's Parish for Black Catholics. Originally known as the Negro Church, the parish comprised Black and mixed-race descendants of Caribbean Catholic refugees. Because the first missionary priest there was an Italian Jesuit, Charleston's Italians also worshipped there. Several important Catholic Church leaders emerged from this parish. James Spencer, whose mother was a descendant of Saint-Domingue refugee, was a Reconstruction politician who advocated equally for blacks and whites in society, as in the church. Spencer and Joseph Genvier, also descendant of Saint-Domingue refugees, emerged as civic leaders and were active in the National Colored Catholic Congress, where they pressed for equal Catholic education for black Catholic children. These mixed-race French Catholic parishioners complained loudly that they could not understand Father Fulci's sermons, but the Italians were pleased. In 1872, the Mill Hill Fathers, a newly formed British missionary order, took over St. Peter's Parish. These missionaries were devoted strictly to ministry to blacks and were forbidden by their vows to minister to whites. The priests brought a breath of fresh spirituality to the city because, to the dismay of local clergy, they quickly attracted whites who tithed at St. Peter's rather than their usual parishes. In addition to parish work, the priests sought out neglected black Catholics in the rural areas around Charleston and staffed a school at the city parish. Early in the antebellum era, Catholic plantation owners on Hutchinson's Island, Bennett's Point, and Green Pond had their enslaved people baptized, many of whom still resided near their former plantations. The Mill Hill Fathers wrote enthusiastic letters describing their experiences slogging through swamps and marshes, battling mosquitoes and snakes to celebrate Mass and the sacraments. Catholic Hill, the site of Black Catholic persistence, was one of the Mill Hill Fathers' missions, later named St. James the Greater. Once considered an isolated enclave, the community sustained Catholicism despite infrequent pastoral visits. The Charleston Courier newspaper, founded in 1801, covered politics and civic events as well as church news throughout the 19th century. Reporters regularly wrote about impressive Christmas and Easter celebrations of most city churches, including black and white Catholic churches. This post-Civil War enthusiasm for Catholic activities reflects the noteworthy status of all Catholics of the era. Reporters were particularly laudatory about Catholic solemn services. They described the music, including the names of soloists and composers, flower arrangements, and the genteel manner of the faithful. The newspaper published Sunday school graduations and St. Peter's School Achievement Prizes, May festivals, and fundraisers. Reporters lauded St. Peter's Bazaar for its attractive wares and the fact that prominent white families enthusiastically attended it. Charleston's black Catholics were an important part of Charleston's culture. Bishop Harry Northrop imposed Jim Crow-style segregation upon Charleston's Catholic churches in the late 1880s. He mirrored prevailing secular racial attitudes, in part to secure funding from the newly established Negro and Indian Fund. American Catholic bishops, under pressure from Rome to minister to American blacks, asked each diocese to take up a special collection from all parishes on the first Sunday of Lent. The aggregated funds were to be dispersed to those dioceses with Black and Native American populations. Northern dioceses raised significant funds. Southern dioceses struggled. For the first years of the fund to the present, South Carolina received more donations than it received more donations than it contributed. Missionary activity to Black Catholics increased in the 20th century. Immaculate Conception Parish became the second Black Catholic parish in Charleston. That parish school was the first Black Catholic high school, staffed by the Oblate Sisters of Providence. In 1930s, the state of South Carolina developed educational standards for teachers, which included college education and certification. Bishop Emma Walsh insisted the Black sisters obtain certification. The principal angrily pointed out that no Black woman would be able to accomplish that in segregated South Carolina. Desegregating the church in the 1970s meant reintegrating Catholic churches and the simultaneous dismantling of the rich tradition of Black worship practices. Even in the 1830s, Bishop John England observed St. Patrick's Church, which was mostly Irish, also had Black families which worshipped in their own way. European French Catholics and French Catholics of African descent changed South Carolina's British Protestant biracial society in many ways, some of which have been absorbed in the dominant culture. Yet Caribbean Catholic culture endures, as witnessed by the accession of the most recent Bishop of Charleston, Jacques Fabre-Jean, a Haitian Catholic raised in New York, now in Charleston.